Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to explore exactly how Jane Austen took the ordinary everyday lives of the 19th century and spun them into extraordinary, immortal literature. When we think of foundational literary giants, names like Shakespeare, Dickens, or Tolstoy usually pop right into our heads. But standing right there alongside them is a woman who achieved absolute global immortality, and she did it while publishing her defining works completely anonymously. It's wildly ironic, right? One of the most famous names in literary history was literally unknown to her own readers. So how did she pull this off? How did she completely transform the English novel? Well, let's dive right in. To really get her genius, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a reader back in the 18th century. When you cracked open a novel back then, you were almost always hitting these sweeping tales of kings, massive wars, and grand epic quests. That's what people thought of as, important literature. But Austen, she realized something entirely radical. She noticed that the absolute most compelling, high-stakes drama wasn't happening out on some battlefield. It was actually happening right there in the family drawing room. She looked at how people behaved at local dances, awkward family dinners, and everyday social events, and she hit the nail on the head. She recognized that these seemingly quiet little moments held the true essence of the human experience. Section 1. The Eye for the Ordinary. So to understand how she revolutionized the novel, we've got to start with her early life. She was born in 1775 in the tiny English village of Steventon, and being the seventh of 8 children gave Jane the absolute perfect laboratory to just sit back and observe complex human behavior every single day. She was incredibly well educated for a girl in her era, mostly because she basically devoured her clergyman father's extensive library. And working alongside a super close, lifelong bond with her older sister Cassandra, a teenage Jane started writing her own material. Between ages 11 and 18, she cranked out a collection we now call the Juvenilia. Now, these weren't just cute childhood scribbles, no way. They were already packed with sharp wit, biting satire, and this amazing eye for social absurdities. Like, she would write these hilarious, over-the-top stories, totally making fun of the delicate, constantly fainting heroines that were so popular back then, mostly just to make her sister laugh. Her brilliant eye for human vanity, yeah, it was already fully formed. Section 2. Independence over financial security. Okay, let's pivot to her personal life for a second and look at the real-life romantic pursuits she dealt with, because this right here builds the core tension of her greatest stories. First up was Tom Lefroy. They met in 1795, and they had this genuine, undeniable spark. But neither of them had any money. The harsh social realities of the time meant marriage was basically impossible, and he was eventually sent away to marry someone with deeper pockets. Then, years later, a guy named Harris Big Wither came along. He offered her exactly what Lefroy couldn't: immense wealth, a massive estate, and lifelong financial security, not just for her, but for her vulnerable family. And she accepted. She actually accepted the proposal. But then, in a stunning plot twist, she woke up the very next morning and shocked everyone by taking it back. She simply couldn't bring herself to marry without affection, literally walking away from the ultimate safety net. And that brings us to an absolutely crucial point. That exact real-life tension became the undeniable DNA of her legendary heroines: love versus economic necessity. This wasn't just some clever plot device she cooked up to sell books. When you read about a character like Elizabeth Bennet fiercely turning down the financially secure but utterly ridiculous Mr. Collins, you're literally watching Jane Austen process the terrifying, very real choices that women faced in her era. Section 3. Masterpieces by a Lady. Now, actually becoming a published female author in the early 19th century, that meant fighting a steep uphill battle against intense societal prejudice. Women were strictly expected to stay in domestic roles. It took years of real financial hardship to finally break through. For example, a publisher actually bought her first manuscript in 1803, but then nothing. They inexplicably left it gathering dust and never published it. Then a massive crisis hit. Her father died in 1805. For women back then, losing the male head of the household almost always meant instant poverty. This kicked off years of severe financial panic and rootlessness for Jane, Cassandra, and their mom. It wasn't until 1809, when her brother offered them a quiet little cottage in Chawton, that they finally had a permanent home again. And that quiet stability, it was the exact catalyst she needed to pull out her old drafts and finally get to work revising her greatest masterpieces. And man, did that hard work pay off. Her first taste of genuine literary success came in 1811 with Sense and Sensibility, a book that beautifully tracked the deep emotions and harsh financial realities of the Dashwood sisters. Readers absolutely devoured it. But notice how the author is listed on the title page. It just says, by a lady. Austen maintained total anonymity. But the wild success of that novel proved something absolutely monumental to the publishing world. It proved that a story written by a woman entirely about the inner lives of women could be complex, deeply moving, and a massive commercial hit. That first triumph kicked off an explosive creative streak. Just look at this run of masterworks. Sense and Sensibility in 1811, the immortal Pride and Prejudice in 1813, Mansfield Park in 1814, and the technically brilliant Emma in 1815. And what's wild is she wrote all of these in the busy, shared sitting room of that Chawton cottage. There's actually a famous story that she relied on a creaking door to warn her when servants were coming, so she could quickly stash her manuscripts under a blotter. She was winning serious literary acclaim. I mean, she was even asked to dedicate Emma to the British Prince Regent because he was such a huge fan. And she did all of this while the general public still had absolutely no clue who she was. Okay, so let's pause here and really dig into this mystery. What actually made Jane Austen so different from other writers of her time? How did a woman writing quietly in a Hampshire cottage about local dances and courtship completely change the trajectory of English literature forever? Section 4. Revolutionizing the English novel. The answer really lies in her unparalleled ability to mix elegance and biting irony with deep psychological truth. She didn't just record conversations, she captured human consciousness itself. And she did this by mastering an incredibly sophisticated innovation called free indirect discourse. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, instead of a narrator just standing on the outside telling us, Elizabeth thought Mr. Darcy was being awful, the narrator's objective voice completely merges with the character's subjective feelings. The narrative voice suddenly adopts Elizabeth's sassy, biased, frustrated attitude without ever actually switching to the word I. So we aren't just watching her from across the room anymore. We're suddenly planted directly inside her head, watching her personal biases play out in real time. It was a real game changer. This technique alone influenced almost every great novelist that came after her. You see, Austen wasn't just writing light, breezy romance novels. Not at all. She was subtly smuggling these incredibly heavy societal critiques right into the family drawing room. When her characters are casually chatting about a ball gown or bickering over a carriage ride, they aren't really talking about clothes or carriages. They're navigating class and social mobility. They're maneuvering through the incredibly harsh reality of a world where a woman's only real career option was a profitable marriage. She basically locked these complex maps of human psychology, our pride, our vanity, and the absolute need for self-awareness straight into conversations over afternoon tea. Section 5. An immortal literary legacy. Tragically, at the absolute peak of her creative powers in 1816, she was even working on brilliant new manuscripts like Persuasion. Austen's health began to rapidly decline. She moved to Winchester seeking medical treatment, but ultimately passed away in 1817. She was only 41 years old. It was actually only after her death that her brother Henry finally revealed her true identity to the world. And over the next 200 years, her reputation just exploded. She went from having this modest, anonymous little readership to becoming a massive, undeniable global icon. Today, her works have been translated into dozens of languages, sparking countless films, stage productions, and modern retellings. As you reflect on the insights from this explainer, I want to leave you with a question. Why do her words remain so incredibly timeless today? Could it be that even though our technology constantly changes and our modern world moves way faster than she ever could have imagined, our fundamental human nature really doesn't? Our struggles with pride, our total blind spots when it comes to prejudice, and our eternal search for love, they remain exactly the same. It is a profound testament to a woman who proved, once and for all, that the most extraordinary literature can and does emerge from the quietest corners of ordinary life.